Hello, once again. This is the Doctor of Digital from the Doctor of Digital podcast. The purpose of the show is to transform your business with life and education, inspiration. I introduce busy business leaders to trends in business, technology, and marketing to highlight people you should know. Do you know what it feels like when your company is a sinking ship and you're just laughing while it's going down? If so, you're not alone. My next guest has spent decades observing and experiencing the dysfunctional chaos that plagues many organizations, from calculating the a-hole density ratio to navigating the treacherous waters of poor customer service and excessive bureaucracy. He has seen it all. And now he's here to share his insights and hilarious stories about the 7 habits of highly dysfunctional companies. So buckle up and get ready to laugh or cry as we dive into the absurdities of the corporate world. My guest is a retired cybersecurity consultant and self proclaimed adult survivor of the corporate world. After decades of witnessing firsthand the dysfunction that plagues many organizations, he decided to channel his experiences into a humorous yet insightful book, The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies. From convoluted language and excessive acronyms to poor communication and treating employees poorly, the book explores the anti manual on how not to run a business. With a wealth of knowledge and a sharp wit, the book delivers to keep readers entertained while providing a satirical yet eye opening look at the pitfalls that can derail even the most well intentioned companies. Whether you're a seasoned executive or just starting your corporate journey, the episode promises to be a hilarious and relatable ride. During this episode, we'll do a deep dive into the changes and hot topics of successfully transforming a dysfunctional company. We will leverage the expertise of my guests and how to navigate the unique dynamics of the field. By the end of this episode, you will be better equipped to know what to do, and I encourage you to contact my guest, Joel Dubin, who's a retired cybersecurity consultant. And with that, we want to welcome Joel. Thanks for taking some time out. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me, Mick. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's very interesting that how you came up with this phenomenal idea. So I'm really curious of how, and tell us a little bit about your background. How did you start in this?
So, a couple decades ago, about 25 years ago, I started out in cybersecurity. And what I do is I call on clients and I review their security and I reviewed their security procedures. So not only was the book about the maybe 100 companies that I reviewed, but it's also
Yeah.
about companies I worked for as well. So it ranged from small companies to large companies,
Okay.
family owned, Fortune 500 type companies, and so on. And over the years, I developed, seeing all kinds of nonsense that I would see going on in companies. In some cases, damaging to their security. It was kind of like shooting themselves in the foot,
Right.
and I developed these kind of 7 habits that I saw were the most common things that
Okay.
happen at a lot of companies. The first one, of course, is, if it makes sense, don't do it. I saw companies trying to make things complicated or just stupid things like, for instance, customers that, liked a store in a particular location. So then the company would close the store and move it somewhere else where people weren't going. What are they thinking? Or moving offices away from employees so that they could commute long distances and be fresh and crisp when they came to work every morning.
Yeah.
And then I noticed turf battles were common. There were just people in these particularly larger companies where they weren't even thinking about the business. They were thinking about their little kingdoms and fiefdoms. They probably should have been wearing, as I make jokes about in the book, wearing knight uniforms and mace and swords, because or actually in the world today, you'd see 2 executives beating each other up with laptops in the hall. I guess that's kind of the modern equivalent. So
Yeah.
I see people more interested in turf building and
Mm.
building little political centers that they could battle each other, and they weren't really. Sometimes there were days I wanted to say, "What do you know what business we're in anymore?" You know, that kind of a thing. Or in the middle of a meeting where there was some crazy security standard that made no sense, and people are just going arguing in circles. I just once in a meeting, and I'm known for being outspoken. I says, whoever wrote this, whatever they were smoking, they should share it with the rest of us because it's some pretty good stuff. You know. And then I go, then I run the gamut of meeting, poor communication. I
Mm,
say a lot of employees at these companies, they have whiplash, from their head going back and forth. They said this yesterday and they said something else today. What are we talking about? That kind of a thing. And then meetings, which are that kind of rolls off of poor communication, right?
mm,
People that were in endless meetings. Meetings are like the bane of the existence of
absolutely.
dysfunctional companies. And I have a long chapter about meetings, about, employees should have, they should have laser pointers so that they can participate. You should never use a whiteboard in a meeting because that involves creativity. That allows people to think freely. PowerPoint should be required in every meeting, and meetings should be run by people that don't know what they're doing, so that meetings kind of go aimless. You should have defibrillators and oxygen tanks in meetings, because you never know when someone might pass out. And of course, employees should have water bottles to be hydrated during long hours in meetings. And I talk about meeting police who are in the halls of the office, with little armbands, and they look for people that are not in a meeting, and they approach them and they'll put you in a meeting, even if it has nothing to do with what your job function is, you know. So I talk about meetings, I talk about poor customer service. I think even beyond working for a company, just as ordinary consumers,
Mm,
it's almost impossible to reach a human being. So I one of my habits was human contact with customers is totally prohibited. Because now when you call up, you can't even get a phone number sometimes. You can't find it on a website. You have to Google. It's like a research project. Then when you get a number, you get this menu, and then the menu has nothing to do with what you're looking for. So you're screaming in the phone, you're screaming in the representative, Mayday, help me, I'm sinking, and all these things that are going on. And eventually, maybe if you hit the right combination of
mm,
keypad numbers, you get through to someone. I call that menu bingo. And menus should be designed so that they're not easy to use. And then in the rare case you do get to someone, they're reading a script, they don't know what they're talking about, or customer service is kind of like a conveyor belt. Oh, that's not my job. Let me move you to the next important department. So it's like a hot potato. No one should take credit and no one should assist. It should just keep moving on until it kind of drops off the face of the earth. And then I talk about, of course, employees. I talk about, the twin enemies of any dysfunctional company are its employees and its customers. Well,
mm,
customers are easy to deal with. You can drive them away. They're outside the company. They're out of sight, out of mind. But employees, it's like a nagging toothache. They're in the company. You have to do something about them. They're expecting to be paid. What kind of crap is that? I mean, and then they talk about empowerment in these companies, and they do everything to blockade, not listen, give lip service, shake their head, yeah, sounds like a great idea, and then walk away. And then I talk about also how not serving the common good, and I talk there about how companies say one thing and do another, like employees, they're our most important asset. Well, they say that the day before a mass layoff. Doesn't that make sense? That kind of thing. And then I have what I call the S-home management development training program, which in the spirit of poor communication, where you use acronyms, it's called AMDTEP, I call it. And I talk about all the various swamp creatures that are in these companies, because the poor environment, the toxic relationships, and so on, it breeds a situation where really only assholes can get ahead in these companies. And then after they're done at these companies, they can go out and maybe they can work for government where they can do all kinds of damage, right? From everything that they learned at these companies. So that's kind of in a nutshell. After years and years of seeing this and
mm.
seeing this stuff and banging my own head against a wall, I just kind of developed these traits that I noticed were common to all of these companies. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Sure. Sure. When you talk about, are there things that you've seen or changes that have taken
Yes.
place? Or yeah, tell us a little about
I
changes.
think companies have become much more bureaucratic and stodgy. There's much more regulation now. I'm not one that's like the libertarian that says no regulation at all, but I think what's happened, and I see this in security, that rather than looking at security, and I don't want to go off into too technical a track here, is that companies are just kind of following these rigid rules and checklists. It's called compliance, and they're meeting standards, but they're not really looking seriously at
Mm,
security. And while they're looking at rules and regulation, the hackers are kind of laughing all the way to the bank, getting in with all kinds of creative ways of breaking in into systems. So that was one thing. I see a lot more of a callous attitude toward employees in the sense that they're disposable. There's no
Mhm.
loyalty. Um, that's another thing that I would recommend is that you should always be prepared. The I call it the corporate angel of death could strike at any time, at any moment. Doesn't matter how good you are, how competent you are. Someone could come over, tap you on the shoulder, hand you a pink slip, and you're done. It could be there a year, it could be there 20 years, although that's pretty rare now. So those are some of the changes that I've seen. Yeah, mostly in that more automation in terms of customer service, in terms of HR. You want a job at a company, you go to their website, you send a resume electronically. God knows if you'll ever see if anyone will ever see it or if
True.
it's even seen. And
Yeah.
I have a recommendation there where I say just put the word asshole in the middle of the resume, and probably their detectors will grab and say, that one, that's a hot candidate. Let's call him in for an interview, that kind of a thing. And I make all kinds of jokes about HR. I think that it's just gotten too yeah, too regulated, too bureaucratic, too difficult to get anything done. And we see the results, in business. We see more nimbler, smaller competitors just kind
Mhm.
of, eating their lunch. And I think AI, and I'm it's
Okay.
all just like everybody else, we're all learning about it now. I can't say that I'm an expert or more of an expert than anybody else. This is going to automate things, and people are going to have to be prepared to kind of shift gears. How are companies going to deal with that? So those are the main changes, Mick, that I've seen over the years.
Is there an area, or you say hot topics? I mean, because you mentioned AI, that might be one. So, are there some hot topics you would address currently?
Well, I have a bias towards security because that's one of the
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
that I'm in. I think that companies need to be, and AI obviously is a big thing, but I think also in terms of people management. I
Mhm.
have an MBA from a top business school. Amazingly, I call it a Master's of Bureaucratic Administration. Seriously, I learned a lot at school. It's a great school. Northwestern and Kellogg was a fantastic school, and learned an incredible amount of things. But I call it that because it's really geared toward organizations and large organizations.
Mhm.
So what I see in terms of you know kind of the hot areas, they don't teach at business school, for example, psychology, right? And I think they should teach psychology. We had like an organizational behavior class where you learn about organizations and organizational structures and how people relate. And I'm not talking about like the psychology you would take in an undergrad program where they teach you about child development, and all these different areas. I'm talking
Mhm.
about something based on like issues of power and ego, right? I think that you have too much ego is in these companies, and you need to kind of check your ego at the door. And there also has to be barriers have to be broken down between the executives and the rest of the staff. Too often, I saw companies where executives are hiding in ivory towers, and then they come out, and I call them like in town halls, right? They come out of the dark, they come out from the underground bunker, and they'll come out and they'll be flanked with all these assistants. It's just like the president and the Secret Service there. And then they talk all this nonsense and bullshit, and you wonder, do they work for the same company? And then someone asks a question, and it's a difficult. Then they'll ask with some plastic thing that they read off of a brochure. But if someone asks a difficult question, I say, two armed security people will come and lift the employee out and take him out in the parking lot. You know, so too often I saw like executives, they have like a big show, right? They come and they make a big deal and it would be announced. Why not just show up unannounced without your assistants? Just walk around and talk to people, see
Mhm.
what they're thinking. They could give you ideas about how to improve the business, how to improve the process. They may bitch and moan about this and that and the other that like everybody does, but you might get some elements of things there that could help you run this business. Too often, a lot of I call it executive blindness. So that those are the key hot areas. Improvement of executive employee relationships. I mentioned AI, I mentioned security, and I mentioned ego, and that kind of thing. Learning psychology.
So we've seen the negative, which you've explained humorously and
Right.
well. So I'm curious, could you offer some ideas, like what would be some recommendations, or what could a business owner or CEO do? Like, what would you recommend?
So as I say, I recommend getting out there, pressing the flesh, talking to your people. Sure, it's important that executives meet, on their own, in their own atmosphere. They're often dealing with sensitive things and big strategic projects and so on. So that's the one thing that I would recommend. The other thing for employees,
Yeah.
I'm not saying to be disloyal and not to do a good job, do the best job that you can.
Okay.
Don't take it all personally. You may work on a project and a company may scrap it after you've done all this work for 6 months. It's not about you. There might be some change in strategic focus, right? So don't take it personally, and
Okay.
always, always, always be
Yeah.
prepared. Today could be your last. You never, never know.
Mm,
Always have a resume ready, try to update it regularly. Take
sure.
advantage of any training. Now, I make a lot of fun in the book about training, but I'm talking about kind of useless training where, in the middle of the day, I get an email saying, you've got to take this training, about, labor procedures. There's nothing to do with my job, but it's part of some regulation. I have to drop everything, take this CBT.
Mm,
It screws up my day. But there were technical trainings that companies that I worked at, they paid for that. So, right. So I learned some new technical skills, something I could put on a resume, something I could sell to a
mhm.
future employer, that type
Right.
of a thing. I had some great, great training in what's called ethical hacking, for example. I wasn't a penetration tester where I did ethical hacking, where I did that type of testing. I did
Okay.
do a lot of security testing, but I didn't try to break into systems, which is one of the skills. One of my certifications required that we go through a boot camp in this. And I, really wasn't necessary, but you know what? I got this skill and I got this certificate, and I can go to
Mm,
someone and say, hey, I have some expertise in ethical hacking, right? Take advantage of training, network, network, network. Use any
mhm.
network. If you're a member of a professional association, go to trade shows. I know some people say trade shows are a waste of time or they're drinking and partying opportunities. They're also great opportunities to meet
Eat.
people
Sure.
in person, go to events,
Mhm.
go to classes, and then use like alumni networks, use any type of as I say, professional networks if you're a member of some society or something like that, and just always, always kind of be out there because once they throw you out the door, you got to have a parachute,
Yep.
and that can be your parachute. I mean, I had once where I was actually let go from a company in the morning, and in the afternoon, I was already having interviews because I was prepared. I had talked to people, so it should always be prepared. Those are the big things.
So, really good advice. Somebody had said, "Don't wait till you get fired to look for a job. You should be
Right.
always looking for your next opportunity, and the day you get a job, start looking for your next one." Just
That's brilliant. That's exactly, don't have that tunnel vision. Too
mhm.
many people, it's like they just get too involved in the job to their heads down so low that they can't see what's above them.
Yeah.
You gotta be proactive. That's just the reality of today's job market. And when you mentioned about changes, that's becoming even more common because the tenure at companies now, people are often at companies only 2, 3 years now, and
Yep.
then they're on to the next one. And even for executives, it's rare for an executive to start at the bottom, kind of climb that ladder up the top. Some of them, they kind of zigzag. They'll make their next management move at the next company. They'll make their next rung up at another company, and then if they reach like the CEO level, it might have been maybe the second in command at another company where it didn't look like the CEO was moving, and the second in command was a person that was ambitious, and they saw an opening and they had the skills and they jumped at it. So sometimes even with the executive level, they're zigzagging up.
Got it. Could you say something about like what's your expertise or what do you offer? Like, what would a person get if they were working to you or just reading the book too? So, could you tell us a
Well,
little bit about that?
as I say, I like to call it an anti-manual of how not to
Yeah,
run a business. So
that's
take
funny.
everything in the book and do the opposite. I even say in the introduction, uh, at some, early on, I says, you can actually take the book and rip it up and throw it in the air and just stop right here, and you'll be fine with your company. Or because many of these people at these companies have big egos, they're going to keep playing the game. So my expertise, I still have some expertise in cybersecurity, although I've been out about a year, but so I still have expertise in that area. Other areas, um, I wouldn't, don't come to me to restructure your company, but I can give you personal advice,
Mm,
maybe about your situation. Tell me what's going
okay.
on. I've heard a lot of these corporate horror stories. What's also not mentioned, I did a lot of business internationally. I'm also a polyglot. I speak multiple languages, so I'm very adept at multicultural and international teams. I've managed teams where there was people in Brazil and India, and then in the U.S. And how do you kind of get all these cats that are herding, herd all these cats together? So I'm good at that. I'm good at dealing with those cultural sensitivities in business, which now we're in a global world. You kind of have to be prepared for. And even in countries where I didn't speak the language, where I did a lot of business in the Far East, where I didn't, maybe a little bit here and there, but not enough to do business, I understood the culture enough to be able to work with them and integrate them into a team. You'll have a team of people from, as I say, from Hong Kong, from India, from the
Right.
UK, from the US. And a lot of these people have very different business cultures or different ways that they
True.
want to see things done. So I'm kind of good at that kind of multicultural international focus, in that regard. So international business is also an area that's a specialty of mine. And then the language area. So I'm familiar with learning languages and speaking a lot of languages as well. So I'm active in the global polyglot community as well.
Got it. Love to give us some contact information. How do you get a hold of you? And please
Okay.
tell us, how do you get a hold of this book? Because it's hilarious.
Okay, the book is on Amazon. So,
Okay.
but you can reach me at dysfunctionalcompany@yahoo.com. That's my email. And it does work. It works. So,
Right. It's something that does work. It is
yeah.
not dysfunctional, just
Yeah, it's
like the
not
name.
dysfunctional. But yeah, just keep the faith, people. There is hope. Another thing, just I'd like to add, kind of make is a footnote. A lot of people kind of have this entrepreneurial itch.
True.
Nothing wrong with that at all. Believe me, not. But I just want to say it's not for everybody. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur. Not everybody kind of has the stomach for it because there's ups and downs, and you have to make sacrifices and so on. So your personal reality might be that you just may have to work for someone else, or also you're better at that, or you don't have to chase people that aren't paying bills or look for customers. You just kind of
Right.
do your particular specialty. So, if that's the case, kind of know yourself. Emma, is it really a good idea
Yeah.
for me to be an entrepreneur? Because so many people are selling that message now everywhere. You're saying, well, get on TikTok and, you can get on YouTube and you can make tens of thousands of dollars a month just doing this. It doesn't always happen. Your place might be working for, another company. So just kind of know yourself and know what works for you. Entrepreneurism, not against it. Don't want to be misquoted. It's not for everybody. You just have to decide what works best for you.
Joel, phenomenal. Thank you so much for taking some time out and
Yeah,
being not only informative, but also humorous too, because in the corporate world, you better keep your sense of humor. You're
yeah.
going to
You're
need
gonna
it.
laugh or you're gonna cry. I'll tell you.
That's
I mean,
right.
this is what I look like every day at the office.
Thanks so much, Joel. I appreciate all the good advice and all the
Thank
wisdom
you,
that you
Mick.
shared today. Thanks for being a guest.
Great. Thank you very much.
You bet. So, if you would like to have something along the lines of an entertaining look at what Joel is talking about, please make sure you get a copy of his book. It's hilarious, laugh or cry, and keep the contact coming. So, like, subscribe, positively review, and share the Doctor of Digital podcast. If you want more guests like Joel, it's entertaining, keep that support coming. I really appreciate it. And once again, thanks to the sponsors, both Burning America and On Track Ian Hunter, for their support. Until next time, Deus Volt.